And this is where we left off on the last one. We were talking about mass extinctions, and as I said, there are five major events. They the major events will deplete or eliminate 50% of the species. There are some mass extinctions, like the one we talked about before, the Permian one, that 90% of marine animals became extinct. But understand that the Earth came back from these extinctions, although it takes millions of years. So the Permian extinction, as I said, defines the boundary between eras, and this is generally true of how we organize these eons or eras. And many times they're organized by mass extinctions in between. As I said, 96%, I said 90, but more like 96% of marine amine species became extinct. Number of factors in terms of our study have contributed to the extinctions. As I said, volcano action, global warming, and this can be caused by numerous things, but mostly the emission of large amounts of CO2 from those volcanoes, reduced temperature, a reduced temperature gradient from the poles, the equator to the poles, so more dramatic, I guess, differences, and less oxygen in the oceans, and reduced mixing from the mixing of waters. So even though you have life, the life needs the oxygen in the water, and then certain life forms, I must say, must specify. Then you also have a mass extinction of the dinosaurs, but the Cretaceous mass extinction 65.5 million years ago. And this is when the dinosaurs became extinct and opened up the door, gave rise to mammals, because a few mammals lived through that extinction and gave rise to it. What the other image that you have here is they have found the crater impact. One of them, they haven't found all of them, the impact from a meteor, and you find this in the Gulf of Mexico. They also find uridium in certain strata, and they know that uridium comes from meteors. So when you see this uridium, which is an element or a compound in the strata of the Earth, this was a time when there were a lot of there was at least one huge meteor that crashed into the Earth, or maybe several. In terms of global warming, extinction rates tend to increase when temperatures increase. So, and this moves along the possibility of extinction by huge mathematical percentages. Mass extinctions alter communities, clearly. If you don't have the major predator in the area, certainly that's going to change communities. Mass extinctions tend to change the atmosphere, tend to change temperatures, pH, etc. Then it takes a long time, 5 to 100 million years, for diversity to recover. Because in any extinction, some life forms are going to live, but the life forms live, and then evolution takes over again, where you have this adaptation and changes. Then mass extinctions pave the way for this concept of adaptive radiation. So with regard to adaptive radiation, and there are many places, particularly Hawaii, where we see an example, a great example of adaptive radiation with the many types of plants you see on Hawaii. This is the evolution of a group of species from a common ancestor, where you have a common ancestor that lived through the extinction, and then the species changes or adaptation lead to multiple different types of species that just radiates out from that common ancestor because it fills the void. The extinction killed off so many of the plants that were plants and animals that were there before. This common ancestor lived through the extinction and radiates out into all of the different areas of the world of the earth, the ecosystems they can. Mammals underwent this adaptive radiation after the extinction of the dinosaurs, as I said. Other radiations include photosynthesis, large predators, land plants, insects, and pteropods. In different eons where you had mass extinction, it allowed the rise of these other species. Adaptive radiations can occur when organisms colonize new environments with little or no competition. So clearly, if the whole arrangement of predator-prey or even of the food source has been shifted, then you're going to have these adaptive radiations. Other things that lead to evolutionary changes, kind of two cute pictures that don't come from your textbook. I just think it's easier to understand these concepts off these. Heterochrony is the evolutionary change in the rate or timing of developmental events that have an impact on body shape. So the first image is an example of heterochrony, where you have a salamander that is born with a tail. And what happens with this particular species of salamander, it becomes reproductively active with the tail. Whereas other salamanders or other species like this, and I don't know that this is a salamander, I'm just saying that because that seems to be something at least I can relate to. But you have other species of this particular group that the tail is doesn't form, or it falls off in more adult forms. Not falls off, but it becomes smaller and smaller, so that you have adult forms without tail. So the idea behind this is when a species becomes reproductively active, and particularly if that happens at younger ages, it can have an impact on body shape. Can alter the timing of reproductive development relative to the development of non-reproductive organs. So how things develop, whether a tail happens or whether a tail doesn't happen. Then paedomorphosis is the rate of reproductive development accelerates compared with body developments. So the little organism that you see at the bottom, what happens, and it kind of looks like a juvenile body, but this is the adult body, and the adult body holds on to these gills that are present in the infant or in the embryo. And so the gill type arrangement happens because the reproductive development is accelerated, body development is not. And then you also have in genetic, at the genetic level, you have the capacity for evolutionary change in terms of genes that control body placement and organization of body parts. We know this class of gene, it's called the Hox genes. They provide positional, meaning here's the head and here's the tail, information during development. If these genes are expressed in quote unquote the wrong place, body parts are going to be produced in the wrong location. And so what you have with these images is you have the same concept, or conceptually the same set of genes, these Hox genes, telling this fruit fly where its body is going to, how its body is going to develop, and comparing that to the same idea of genes, the Hox genes, saying where the human vertebral column is going to develop. And these not only can be, if they're expressed in the wrong place, you can actually have, unfortunately, a leg growing out at the side of the body, or if you have you literally have eyes in the back of your head if they're expressed in the wrong location. Now, sometimes this is a turns into an evolutionary change. Sometimes, as the two that I explained that I just used, these would be mutations that would probably die out. And then as I said, new forms are likely from the duplication of genes that produce new developmental genes, so duplication of one of these Hox genes that allow the fly to go from multiple feet into just the number that we see. So you have this change in morphology because of these body positional genes. The body positional genes will tell the legs where to be, but not tell how many legs. This duplication can actually increase the number of legs or decrease the number of legs. For example, and we're talking about other body parts too. So the possible mechanism for evolution of six-legged insects from many-legged crustaceans can be because of specific changes in one of these Hox genes called the UBX that have been identified to turn off leg development, so that the leg does develop, but just not as many. And then the last bit of this chapter talks about evolutionary trends, and then also ending in kind of a question: why, if evolution is taking place, why don't we make a perfect, why isn't a perfect organism created? And that is more of a philosophical question. First of all, evolution is just working with what's there, and then remember, evolution is attempting through adaptation and natural selection to make an organism that's best adapted for the environment at that time, and the environment is constantly changing. But trends are that there's a single progression from fossils is misleading, and these are trends in other information that's come forth looking at something other than fossil records, like ice dating, and also dating of things that are found in rocks, like the elements that are found in rocks. Trends should be examined in a broader context other than just fossils. And according to species selection models, trends may result in when species with certain characteristics endure longer than those other characteristics. So we have a better chance of having fossils or having some sort of record. And that there is no specific drive in terms of evolutionary toward something to look like a specific thing, so the intrinsic drive toward a particular phenotype. This goes into the idea that evolution is working with what it has there, has at the time, and working with the environment that's there at the time. And then here's what you should be able to do, and I think you probably do a pretty good job of expressing most of this. Talk to you later in talk to you about actually this is the last chapter, so I'm not going to talk to you again in this particular class, but I will talk to you in class.